Welcome to another episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I'm your host, Doug Stuart, and if you're watching with us on YouTube, you can see that I have Chris Freiman, who is professor in the John Chambers College of Business and Economics at West Virginia University. He's the author of several books, including Why It's Okay to Ignore Politics, which we discussed way back on episode 155 of this show, which is back pre-COVID, January 2020. But he has a new book out, which we're going to talk a little bit about, and then we're going to get into some economics. His new book is called Libertarianism, The Basics, and it's coming out maybe this year, maybe soon after this year from Routledge. Chris, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, no, this has been fun. I have caught you on Twitter a lot, or X, I guess we can call it now. I don't know we're in that middle zone where we just call it Twitter/X, and always make a remark about what you're calling it. I caught you being a really good economist on Twitter, and I was like, I gotta have you on again because we are now witnessing the left acting like they understand economics with Trump's trade policies and things like that. And so we'll get into that a little bit. But tell us about your new book. What did I read the title right? Libertarianism, The Basics. What's it all about?
Yeah, that's right. So it's co-authored with a friend of mine, Jess Flanagan. She's a professor at the University of Richmond. One of my favorite political philosophers. And so, it's basic. I mean, it's more or less an introduction to libertarianism. So it's sort of very wide ranging, almost anything you could want to know about libertarianism. I think we try to cover in that book. And I guess maybe one way of characterizing what we're up to is trying to do sort of like an intermediate approach to this, where it's not like purely theory driven. So it's not like reading a philosophy textbook or like Robert Nozick sort of thing. And it's not totally policy focused. It's more sort of in between, maybe PPE sort of idea there. And the thought is just maybe, somebody who doesn't really know what libertarianism is or just has a superficial understanding of it and wants to get a sense of maybe why a reasonable person would believe the libertarian take on, I don't know, eliminating prescription drug requirements, for example.
Yeah. Okay.
We hope to provide answers for that sort of person.
Is it a like a defense and apologetic in some way, or is it more like here's just the information if you need to know?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say in some cases it is a defense. So, for example, we try to present a case for libertarian positions on a variety of policies in a way that shows why those positions are compelling. In other places, I think it is more just here is what a libertarian might think about these issues. Here are some justifications that have been offered by libertarianism, and we don't really put our own take on it. So in some areas, it's just here's what other libertarians have said about this. And one thing that I think is sort of interesting about this book is, Jess and I disagree about some things. And so philosophically, we actually disagree about quite a bit. She's more of a natural rights kind of person, for lack of a better term. I'm more of a consequentialist. And so we do try to give a variety of perspectives.
So that probably played pretty well as you were writing things, right?
Yeah, I would say so. We didn't have too many disagreements about what to include. So, and even then, I'm pretty simple. Like I always sort of feel the pull of these natural rights-based arguments, even if on some level I don't fully buy them. I read them and I think, that's pretty good. That's like a pretty compelling argument. So,
yeah. Well, sometimes I wonder if the sort of tack you take when you try to help people understand libertarianism from a particular viewpoint has to be somewhat modified by who you're talking to. If you're talking to a conservative, natural rights might be something a little bit better. If you're talking to somebody who's more leftist, who say concerned about the plight of the poor, those are the marginalized, they might be more appealing. A consequentialist argument might feel more appealing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And so that also reminds me of maybe one of the goals of this book is we try not to presume much of a philosophical or economic background. And so we are trying to sort of meet people where they're at. So like I said, unlike maybe your standard sort of book of philosophy, we try to focus on particular cases and like use analogies to make almost like a common sense case for libertarianism in a lot of places.
Yeah. Okay. So is there something about the 2020s that this book sort of meets the niche for? Because I have my bookshelf here behind me, and I could have filled the top shelf that you can kind of see with all of the libertarian basics books that I have, right? And so what would your, and some of them are pretty old, some of them are from like the late 90s. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, something like, even things from like Milton Friedman, although it's not a direct libertarian defense, could also be included when you're looking at introductory stuff. Where does yours fit in? How does it match the audience of 2025?
Well, first, I should say what truly differentiates our books from the ones that are on your shelf is ours will be the best and the definitive libertarianism of the basic. So I just want to get that out of the way. It's going to be the gold standard. So that's, so like that. So, I mean, I think something that differentiates it certainly from a lot of the older stuff is like we spend a lot of time talking about libertarian approaches to climate change, for example, libertarian approaches to exploitation. So we talk a lot about price gouging issues, sweatshop labor, the minimum wage, these sorts of things. Talk a little bit about things like geoengineering, body modification. So we talk about trans rights, these sorts of debates. So a lot of stuff that probably wasn't included in previous introductory libertarian books we're tackling in this one.
Gotcha. Okay. So those things in and of themselves are going to be a new take or a fresh take on those issues that we wouldn't have probably dealt with.
I hope so.
In previous years.
That's the goal.
Yeah. How big is it? How long is it, I guess?
Question. I want to say like 80,000 80,000 pages would be quite a lot.
It will be the definitive if it's 80,000 pages.
Yeah. So it's, I think the final cut is yet to be fully determined, but it's somewhere right around there.
Okay. All right. So does it, okay, here's the most important question. Does it have as many Seinfeld references as you do on Twitter?
It has at least one. Does it have more than one? So I'll tell you. So here's just a case. And I think maybe this will help give people a sense of what the book is like. So at-will employment is something that libertarians will defend, but is not like a particularly popular position. So if you're an employer, the idea is that you can essentially, assuming there's no sort of contract that specifies otherwise, you have the right to fire your employees. And people don't like you should be allowed to do this. This gives employers too much power over employees. And we talk about this sort of objection, like what libertarian solutions to what's sometimes called employer domination or workplace domination. So this has become a big literature and philosophy in like the last 10 to 15 years. Like employers are dominating their employees is a big problem of capitalism. We talk a lot about that.
Got it. I'm glad you're tackling that in particular, because that is something that a lot of people are talking about.
Yeah. So we've been thinking a lot about that, and so we included a lot of our thoughts in the book. And so just one argument against at-will employment is, you shouldn't be allowed to make sort of arbitrary decisions that like really negatively impact someone's life. Something like that. So it's like if the employer says, I don't like this tattoo you just got, you're fired. It's like, well, that seems unfair. It seems like that you're exercising this kind of impermissible kind of power over the employees. It seems very bad. And maybe that's all true. So like, this is another thing that we really emphasize in the book. I don't know, maybe I should have tried this out before we actually put it in the book, because it's like a little cutesy, but like a distinction between what is awful and what ought to be unlawful. So get like the little rhyme there. Because I think like a lot of libertarianism sort of turns on this distinction. We say, that's awful. Like if an employer fired you for that, that is awful. The question is, should it be unlawful? And we argue no. And so this goes to the Seinfeld point. So like, do you remember the episode of Seinfeld where Jerry like sees his girlfriend eat peas? And she doesn't scoop the peas. She pierces each one individually with her fork. And he's like baffled by this. He gets really angry. And so we talk about this where it's like, so like imagine you, like this is somebody like maybe you've been with for like 20 years and you're just like, I'm done. And you're like, done? What are you talking about? Like, I don't like the way you eat peas. That would be very dumb. It would be very dumb to do that. It is awful to do that. But like nobody would think it's unlawful for Jerry Seinfeld to break up with his girlfriend over this.
Yeah. Okay.
And so like the idea is just you can say that an employer who would do that sort of thing is awful. Like, fair enough. But then you have to make a further argument to establish that it's the sort of thing that should be unlawful.
Okay, that's good. I was hoping it would be the foreign policy, American foreign policy in a nutshell. They don't want us there, so we're going.
Yeah. Here's the thing, though.
It's not done yet. You go back in there.
I know. We might still have time. I don't know. Jess might only tolerate one Seinfeld reference. I don't know how. Like, this is the thing. It's like a collaborative process. So maybe the next time I solo author a book, I'll have to.
You could just my guess is that you solo author your X feed, right? And that's what this is what I want to segue to, because one of the things that have kind of caught my attention again from you is that you are constantly putting out not just memes. I don't want to undersell what you're doing. You're putting out graphs, you're putting out memes, you're putting out quotes from movies.
No, you don't have to. That's okay. Fine. My memes are my best. It's like my true medium. The memes. It's okay.
Yeah, there's some sort of new word there, neologism that we could come up with for that. But part of what is attractive about what you're doing on X is that you are challenging people's assumptions, and sometimes you're actually just outright replying to somebody like, I don't know, Robert Reich who just spew, or Bernie Sanders who just spews like inaccuracies, right, about economics or whatever it might be. Is this any rhyme or reason, or is it just like what you notice on X and you're just like, hey, I got a meme for that and I'm gonna comment? Like, is there a plan? Is there a master plan here? Or are you just kind of going like Trump and just being like, I'm just gonna say what I think?
What did Trump? He's like, I don't have a plan. I have concepts of a plan or something. I think he said at one point. I don't even know if I have concepts of a plan. Yeah.
Okay.
So like, there are definitely certain things. So there are definitely like certain mistakes that I see getting made very consistently on Twitter. And so then I feel compelled to correct them. So things about like people getting poor over time, like that's a big one. People are getting poor over time. And it's just like, it's just not that true. It's just not true. That
they're getting what? Oh, poorer over time. Gotcha.
Yeah. So people are getting richer worldwide and in the US. So poverty is on the decline. Like the world is this is probably, so insofar as I have a plan, I don't really have a plan, but insofar as there's like a unifying theme, it's like the world is actually a lot better than most people think it is. And I do think that's important. So, I mean, so one issue is when people think that the world is terrible and getting worse, then they seem to become more susceptible to let's tear down the system and try something new. And I think we're kind of seeing that both from the left and the right now. And like for good Hayekian reasons, we should be skeptical of that. And so it's important to know how good we have it, which is not to say that it's perfect, but like, let's not tear down the capitalist system because you think it's failed. Say, no, like there are ways we can make it better. But basically the system we've got is pretty good. Like, let's not try to start from scratch here.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I heard you correctly, your plan is characterized by the meme, someone's wrong on the internet.
I got to
deal with it.
Correct them. That's right.
There you go.
Yeah. And my expectation is not that the person who is wrong will see the error of their ways, but hopefully, somebody might see what I post and then say, oh, like that's interesting. I never knew that. Like, oh, like poverty is on the decline, like worldwide. That's like it's
baffling to me that people don't realize that.
Yeah, I know. I feel the same way. It really seems like the sort of thing that you come out of high school and you should know sort of basic facts about the world and these sorts of economic trends, things like that. But people just don't know.
I posted an article a couple years ago from Human Progress, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Love Human Progress, yeah.
Yeah. So I posted an article from it, and all of their sources, all of the footnotes that you see are all World Bank data, right? Like most of them are all World Bank data. This is not data funded by libertarian billionaires, right? Or something like that. This is data that everybody could just go look for, right? And somebody actually commented, I don't trust any organization that's funded by the Koch brothers. And I was like, wait a second. The data are down there. This is World Bank data, guys. So it's just people want to ad hominem as soon as they realize that, like, oh no.
That's people think the Kochs must fund all I don't know, optimistic economic data. And I love the Human Progress stuff. So one of the things in particular that I always really appreciate is when they talk about the time price of goods evolving over time. So they'll say, I don't know, I'm just making up this number, but this is, I think, sort of representative of the sort of trends that you do see. It's like, in 1970, the typical blue collar American worker would have to work like 45 minutes to buy a loaf of bread. In the year 2025, it's like 12 minutes. Well, probably less than that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And I think like that's actually a really great way of making it vivid just how much better off we are now than in the past. Like, there's another thing you see on Twitter. They're like, what happened to America in like the 50s? And we were so rich. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, we're so much richer in 2025 than in 1950. But like people, it's bizarre to me. Yeah.
Well, I would want to know if maybe you don't have data on this and you can respond to the concept, and maybe you can go look for it if you don't have any data. I want to know so the pushback that I have about, the doubt I have about that sort of thing, if I could put myself in a leftist's shoes or put myself in a cynical version of, well, that number going from 45 minutes to 12 minutes to buy a loaf of bread. Okay, that's fine, but that's just to buy a loaf of bread. The cost of living, and I don't mean the cost of living as in like all of the goods that we need to live, the number of things that we have to buy in order to actually survive have not necessarily gotten more expensive, because you could say, oh, well, look at how cheap cell phones have gotten compared to the 90s. Or you could look at how cheap a washing machine has gotten compared to the 90s or the 80s or the 70s. You could do all that, but the number of things to, I guess you could say, just get by in the world has gone up, and therefore sort of the base level price of living is a higher base level price, even in the terms of hours. Does that make any sense? Like no one says, I remember, I guess it was Jon Stewart or maybe it was John Oliver making fun of some libertarian or congressman like Rand Paul saying something like, it used to cost so much. It was just kind of the same thing. And it's kind of like they were making fun of the idea that poor people shouldn't have luxuries now because they didn't have luxuries back then. And so they were anyway, you probably get the gist of what I'm trying to ask here.
Yeah. So like, is the idea that like, for example, like in 1950, you didn't have to have a smartphone, but basically to function in 202025, you have to have a smartphone, stuff like that.
Right.
I think that's a fair point.
In addition to other things like internet access and like, add up the things that we have in a modern world that everybody actually needs, but we wouldn't call necessity. Nobody calls a smartphone a necessity, but it actually kind of is.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think even I don't know. I think Adam Smith talked about this sort of not about like smartphones, obviously, but just like this idea that over time, like I forget how he put it, but it's like what you need to maintain an acceptable standard of living increases. And that's like a very intuitive idea. So I don't have the data on that. My hunch though, is that even all things considered, it would still probably be significantly, like the cost of living is significantly lower now. I mean, the sort of elephant in the room with this stuff is always housing. So this is something that I often get like on Twitter when I post this stuff about, oh, look how cheap everything is. Well, I'm like, yeah, look at housing. And so I've seen different takes on this. So I read something fairly recently that suggested that even housing has gotten slightly cheaper over the course of the last 70 years, although it hasn't declined in the way all the other goods have. I've seen other people say, no, it actually has gotten more expensive. But I mean, the reason for that is just all of these hurdles that somebody has to clear to actually build new housing. So like one of the thought experiments that I'll give is like, look, forget housing for a second. Like just take a different sort of good, like maybe it's bread or something like that. And like the price skyrockets and you're in a position to produce more bread and, you're pursuing your economic self-interest. What are you going to do? You're going to bake more bread, ultimately drive down the price. It's the magic of the market. And so like, why don't we see that same sort of behavior from developers? Like the price is really high. Do they just not want to make money? Like, is this, and it's like, I don't think it's that they don't want to make money. It's like, it's just very, very difficult to build. If it was as easy to build as it was to bake, then, rent would be far cheaper now than it currently is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What about the living wage? I hear this a lot in the sense of like, I mean, this is a pretty common critique. It's like, well, if we're going to build a company, it should be one that you provide your employees a living wage, a wage that they don't have to go get another job and all of this. And part of me wants to say, well, it's not the business owner's fault that the cost of living is higher than it is. But I don't really have anything beyond that, anything substantive. What do you say to people?
So I love this question because I've been thinking a lot about it, and we spent a decent amount of time on it in the book. Although the book definitely goes for like coverage rather than depth, so we don't spend a ton of time on any one issue, but we actually spend a decent amount of time on this. So I have a few thoughts. I guess sort of my central thought here. And I'm not the first person to have this thought. So Matt Walensky has written on this, Jason Brennan has written on this, and I think they're basically right, which is, suppose we just accept that there is a duty to ensure that everyone in the United States can enjoy a minimally decent standard of living. It's not clear why the cost of providing that should fall exclusively on employers. So in other words, like, why would giving someone a job create an additional burden to give them more money than you would otherwise have to give them? So here's like a way of unpacking that. Like, according to the view that this burden of providing a living wage should fall exclusively on employers, if somebody like comes up to me and offers to like work for me, mow my lawn or something like that, I'm under no obligation to give them any job offer. I could just say, no, like, I don't want to employ you. I'm under no obligation to provide employment for anyone.
My son will do it for $10.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, child labor. There you go. I think that's actually, he drives a harder bargain. I think we're ending up paying like 15. It's obscene.
Got it. Yeah.
He's gouging us. But so like, I'm not under any obligation to employ this person. But why would it be the case that when I do say, hey, look, I'm going to employ you, I'm going to pay for your labor and then make you better off, the state comes in and say, well, now you have to pay them even more. It seems like, if anything, I have already done more good for this person than my next door neighbor who has done nothing, who hasn't employed them at all. So I think insofar as there is this duty to make sure that everyone has a decent minimum, it would fall on everybody, not just employers. And so you could say something like, maybe this is an argument for a universal basic income or wage subsidies or something like that. And we could talk about whether those are good ideas. But I just think it is sort of strange that the person who is already providing the employee with this economic benefit is the one who's sort of required to provide the extra benefit, when people who are providing nothing don't have to provide that benefit. It seems like, if anything, the employer is doing the most good for the employee.
Yeah. Okay. I see.
And we also, so one thing we talk about too, and I think this is like an illuminating way of thinking about what duties employers have to their employees, is an employer is essentially just someone who buys labor. Like, they're a buyer essentially. And so you might ask yourself, like, what obligations do buyers have to sellers in general? So we talk about this case in the book where it's like, suppose you're buying a car and like the car dealer is struggling. And in fact, they've like fallen below a decent minimum. And like, I don't know, the car's worth like $10,000, let's say it's a used car or whatever like that. But to get the car dealer to the minimum standard of living, you would have to pay $20,000. Should the state force you to pay an extra $10,000 for that car? I think most people would say, like, no, it's very weird. Like, merely buying a car from that person does not obligate you to give them even more money to ensure that they meet this basic standard of living. Now, again, you might say, society as a whole, we need a safety net. So like, taxpayer money should be going to this person to make sure they don't fall. That's fine. But it would just be very weird to say, oh, you're buying a car from this person, therefore you must pay double the price.
Yeah.
Whereas the person who doesn't buy a car from that person at all is doing no good for the car dealer. So it's the same sort of situation that an employer finds themselves in.
Yeah. So you're coming at it from the argument from several places, but I think the first one was like, well, the option is I don't have to hire you to mow my lawn, or I don't have to hire you to be in my factory if you're going to be a laborer or something like that, or even if it's just like a marketing assistant, whatever. I don't have to hire you. So the alternative is 0, or the wage that you don't quite think is up to living wage, right? On the other argument that I've heard is, okay, that's fine, and maybe from a sort of like small to medium business perspective, that makes a whole lot of sense. But when you get on these really large scales, when you have an Amazon and you have somebody who, my goodness, everybody would be happy with $5 billion the net worth, right? So why do we need somebody with $235 billion net worth? Like, why can't it be that if you're at that level, you just have to reinvest in your company, because no one needs to have that much? And I realize that the quote needs to, I mean, most of us would say nobody needs that. I understand that there's an economic argument for that being lawful, to use your term, but what, for a responsible business owner or CEO or whatever it might be, why is it that that's not an argument for, like, okay, well, these employees could be paid more because clearly the profits are they're adding up and gone into somebody else's pocket and not theirs?
So my initial so actually I have a few thoughts. So one is, so this kind of goes back to this is something I've been thinking a lot about, actually. So I really like this conversation. So one is, like, people are like, all right, we got these like huge corporations and they should be paying higher wages to their employees. But I still have this intuition that kind of goes back to the lawn mowing case. So it's like this. So Amazon made the best offer of employment to those employees. And we know this because this is the offer of employment that they accepted. So if the employees had non-Amazon offers that were better, presumably they would have accepted those offers. And the reason why they work at Amazon is because Amazon gave them the best deal.
It was the best deal they could select.
Right, that's right. And so I kind of go back to this where it's like, Amazon is doing more good for those employees than anyone else. So they've already done good by those employees. They've like produced benefits for those employees. And so, like, it's not clear to me why producing a benefit in the first place then creates a second obligation to provide more. So, but I realize that's like not going to convince everybody.
No, and the reason it's not is, I think, is that not everybody has, like, you and I have the luxury of, spending tomorrow looking for a new job if we lose our job today.
Yeah.
My guess is, just guessing here, you and I have that luxury. The person who's working 40 to 60 hours a week at Amazon or whatever they're allowed to work maximum for very little, maybe they're going to another job, they're not going to have the luxury of looking for another job, even just to experiment with, can I get more money than I am at Amazon? And so the, like, taking advantage of the opportunities. I'm not saying that these people aren't saying that that Amazon or whatever factory going into this new, location in China or Indonesia or wherever isn't actually elevating beyond what that person was capable of before. But if that's their only option, is there room to say, well, maybe this is we're getting taken advantage of situation?
So I think at most that would be an argument for some sort of just general redistributive taxation from rich to poor. So basically, it sounds like the argument boils down to, like, there are some people who are super, super rich. They don't need that extra billion. And there are a lot of people who are working really hard and could benefit from that money and maybe benefit to a much greater degree. So I think that wouldn't be an argument for a living wage in the sense that, like, if you employ this person, you must pay them a certain amount of money. I think at most it's an argument for something like, as you make more money, you have to pay more taxes, and those taxes go to, like, a basic income or a negative income tax that just, like, cuts checks to people below the poverty line, for example. So it wouldn't have to fall. So I'm trying to think of an example. Like, I don't have a great example. Like, I wish I knew, like, I don't know, Mr. Beast. I guess does he employ people? I don't know if he employs people.
Yeah.
Okay.
They call him his friends, but yeah, they're on his payroll.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think, like, I don't know. So I'm trying to think of somebody who's very wealthy who doesn't really employ people. So, like, I don't know, like a pro athlete or something like that, who like, probably has a few employees, like, but they're not like Jeff Bezos. You would say, look, Patrick Mahomes, I think he's a billionaire now, has much more money than he could possibly use. And, like, we could take some of the money from Patrick Mahomes and give it to somebody who's in poverty. That's an argument for like a UBI, I think, rather than saying if you employ this person, you must pay them a certain wage. But the other thing too is it's complicated. I mean, and one complication is I kind of like having money and resources in the hands of entrepreneurs who know how to create wealth. So they're like, there is this sort of short-term versus long-term question here, which is like over the long run, even over the course of one person's lifetime, is it a good idea to allow people who have shown that they can create companies and grow the economy to keep those resources? My inclination is to say that is a good thing.
Yeah.
Even though we might be foregoing some short-term benefits for people in poverty, it's like you want to. I use this analogy or this case for my students. They don't know this anymore. The goose who laid the golden egg. You know this, right?
Yeah.
I don't know this. I don't understand. Like
they didn't hear the. Well, I guess the nursery, not a nursery.
What is it? A parable? I don't really know what you would call a fable. I'm not sure.
Fable. That's it. That's probably what it is. Anyway,
but they never heard it. But it was like fascinating.
Wow.
I know. I'm sorry. They don't get my Seinfeld references. Like, but I thought at least
that's all right. I can understand that. But like, what did your mom read you when you were little?
I know. It's
anyway.
I fear for the future of this country. But
your dad said that, and your dad's dad said that. So they all, yeah.
You don't want to kill the goose to lay the golden egg.
Yeah.
And so like that's always my concern when they're like, all right, it's like, I mean, not that this is what like the idea that you're floating here, but like the radical versions of this, where it's like, no more billionaires. Billionaires shouldn't exist. All billionaires are policy billionaires. Like I said, I like having resources in the hands of entrepreneurs who have shown that they know how to do good things with them.
Okay, one more pushback on that, because the comment would be, yeah, but the reason that they're billionaires is they got there on the backs of not paying people as much as they could have, or on their labor. I mean, classic Marxist exploitation theory. Is that partly true? Is it sometimes true? Is it true always? You probably don't believe it's true always. So I don't think it's true sort of ever in the Marxist sense. So I think there are cases where, and I think this sort of goes to some of the concerns that you raised earlier. So suppose you have someone who like just doesn't have like a lot of time to go job hunting. Like there might be very few employers in their area. And so like if they had a wide range of employers and they actually had the opportunity to shop around, they would get paid $20 an hour. But as a result of like these various issues, they're only getting like $10 an hour. I would say that, yeah, like there is a meaningful sense in which they're being underpaid. So like this is another thing we talk about in the book. It's like Milton Friedman says, the worker's best protection is the existence of many employers. And like I think that's right. But well, so then the other, on the flip side, just to make a comment, their biggest threat is people willing to work for less for the same work.
Yeah.
Like I'm dealing with that with my son right now. He's a teenager and he's got a not minimum wage job, but a job that's like, I don't like this wage, but it's what I can get. And I said, the reason that it's that is because there's a whole bunch of your generation that's willing to work for that money.
Yeah.
And you want $2 more an hour, but if they can't buy it they can buy it for less. So they're not going to buy you for that money.
How does he take that argument?
No, he understands it. I mean, he just thinks it sucks because he's like, but I want to be like, he wants to be the entrepreneur. I mean, he's 17, so he's on the right mental track to provide for himself in a way that is going to be, I just don't want to be working for someone else. Yeah. So yeah,
that's good. We need
intellectually he gets it, but in his gut, it's like, I don't want this to be true.
No, I get that. But I think like for capitalist employment in general, you tend to get paid for the value you produce. So just like a very simple thought experiment. So like here again, you see these people like they do tend to be like Marxists, where they say, the only way you can make a profit is by paying workers less than they're worth. These sorts of things. Like, so capitalism is intrinsically exploitative of the working class. And I don't think that's true. Like I said, I think if you actually have a well-functioning market, you're basically going to get paid according to your marginal product. And so the thought experiment is just something like this. Here again, like so employers are buyers of labor, employees are sellers of labor. So suppose I'm selling a piece of paper that's worth $20. I'm selling a $20 bill.
Mhm.
And there are lots of bidders. And someone's like, all right, I'm going to exploit Freiman. I'm only going to offer him $10 for the $20 bill. Okay. But then there's another person who's going to bid more than $10. They're going to bid 11. And so if you have enough bidders for this piece of paper, it's going to get to its true worth. That's what it's going to sell for. And so similarly, if I'm producing $20 worth of value an hour, let's say, and there are many people looking to buy my labor, that's what my labor is ultimately going to sell for.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned your and Jess's different approaches to this, because as we're talking, you are providing a consequentialist bent on the answers. I'm sort of recognizing as we're going through the conversation. Would she have answered these differently? Do you know?
So she is she's tougher than I am. So like so here's I think what her view is she's also more, she has some like more sophisticated views than I do. I have like very simple-minded philosophical views. I'm like, I like good consequences. I like, GDP. This all. She has very complicated views. And so she'll say things like, so like we could talk about like the living wage, just to use that as an example. So, suppose we get good evidence that mandating a quote unquote living wage reduces employment. So like if you have to pay more for labor, you're going to buy less, like standard sorts of arguments there. To me, I would say like that's a very crucial reason to reject it. I think her view is something like, that is a reason to reject a living wage, but it's like not a decisive reason. So for her, like I think a lot of her sort of moral view like centers around people having like very, very strong rights. And so like I think her view is like, for example, like she's not so much like she has a different view about like property rights relative to other rights. Like that's sort of another thing that comes out in the book. But like let me give you another example. Actually, maybe the living wage one wasn't a very good one. Like the war on drugs, is maybe a clearer example. I'd be like, I don't like the war on drugs because, like, look at all these negative effects it's had, like, the whole 9 yards. She would say, yeah. Those are important considerations to think about. But here's ultimately why you should oppose the war on drugs, because you have the right to do drugs. It's your body. You can put drugs in them. I was like, yeah, no, like I hear you. And so for me, the consequentialist stuff definitely carries a lot more weight. And I think it does carry some weight for her. But like, I think even if like the drug war worked, quote unquote, and she'd say, it's still unjust because you have the right to do drugs.
Yeah. Well, somebody like me would say, because I probably am a little bit more in her camp, although from a rhetorical perspective, I tend to, I guess, lean to the consequentialist, just because I think there's a lot of people who, when their concerns are such that it's like, hey, these people aren't making a living wage, or, you could say that the drug war brought us a president who could blame everything on the border. So, hey, look at what it got us, right? Consequentialist. But it's the I lost my train of thought. Anyway, I'm more in the like natural rights. You have a right to do it, but it's going to have bad consequences because it's unjust, would be kind of the way you link those two.
Yeah. And I'm not opposed to that. So like, and the other thing too is, when you've got a sort of consequentialist view and you're thinking about how you would want consequentialist institutions to operate, it's like my view is you want them to respect people's rights. You don't want them trying to calculate utility and making exceptions, all this sort of stuff. You just want to say like, you do like your body, your choice is like a very good rule. You don't want them constantly trying to tinker with that rule in order to maximize utility or whatever the case may be. You just want to get the rule. This is like, standard kind of rule consequential stuff. You just want to get those right, the laws right, and then sort of let things function. I mean, one thing that, one way we kind of approach some of these questions is like, and I think this is a view that some libertarians have. So this is like Michael Humer's view, which is like rights, you sort of default to rights. But if respecting rights becomes extraordinarily costly, you might be able to override them. So an example of this would be, you're freezing to death, and there's like a store that has tons and tons of like warm blankets and jackets and so on. It could save your life. but either it's closed or the owner refuses to give you one, whatever. I could probably violate that owner's property rights, steal a jacket, give it to you to save your life. And now you might say, oh, that doesn't show that the store owner doesn't have a property right. Maybe they have the property right, but it just gets overridden and you have to pay them compensation, that sort of thing. But the idea is that, like, at a certain point, you can violate rights to avoid a really terrible outcome. Even Nozick has this line, which people don't really discuss a whole lot, where he says you can violate rights to avert what he calls catastrophic moral horror. So, like, an example we give in the book is like, this is like,
that's a loaded phrase. My gosh.
And who knows what that is? Yeah. But like, so here's what I thought of. Like,
I'm going to use that someday.
To her credit, she was very tolerant of this example. It's sort of like a Bruce Willis kind of movie. It's like half Die Hard, half Armageddon.
Okay.
Where it's like the asteroid is coming, it's like going to hit Earth and it's going to kill everyone. And like Bruce Willis has to get to NASA to like stop the asteroid. But he doesn't have a car. And the only way he can get to NASA and save the world is by like hot wiring somebody's car and stealing it. And he'll never be able to return it. He doesn't know who owns it. He can't pay compensation. He's got to hotwire the car and violate the person's property. I think Nozick would agree. Maybe that's catastrophic moral horror. And so
is that example in your book?
That is, and I think we call it a bad mashup of Bruce Willis movies.
Okay. Nice.
Most of the silly examples are mine. She's got a couple. Usually they're taking digs at me, which is fair.
Oh, okay. That was the cost of you being allowed to put yours in?
Yeah, she is making fun of my love for new metal. I thought it was a cheap shot.
We should, when the book comes out, we should have her on. We'll have.
You need to hear her side of the story. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I should probably do that. So I would be remiss if this. Did you finish your thought? I think I interrupted you.
Yeah. No.
We were talking about. I think I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the topic that will change by the time we finish the conversation, which is the reason we can talk about it. Because honestly, everybody should know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the tariffs, Trump's tariffs. I don't understand this. The only potential explanation for this is the whole 4D chess thing, right? Or negotiating tactic or whatever. Like, I can't see any mental reason why a tariff would be a good thing, because it's a tax, right? Libertarians know this, economists know this. What's the potential upside to a possible tariff? Is this a tactic to negotiate? Are we going to have zero tariffs by the time this conversation's over? I mean, give me your take on what's happening here, because this is just bizarre. This is more bizarre than I think we even predicted.
Well, so here's the thing. Well, I mean, the short answer is I have no idea. So the optimistic
and
take,
neither does Trump.
Well, yeah, exactly. So
Maybe
here's the optimistic take, but I think it's the least likely. And I'll give you my pessimistic take, which I think is more likely. Right. Okay. So the optimistic take is like, this is actually a tactic to like get total free trade, like via negotiations. I mean, if we had free trade by the end of this conversation, I'd be very, very pleased. I'm not convinced that that's what he's thinking. Mm-hmm. So like, here's a reason. I forget. This was something I saw on Twitter, where somebody was like sitting next to Trump at, I don't know, a conference or something like that. Mm-hmm. And he said, I forget exactly what the context was, but he said Trump was writing, he heard some comment, and Trump wrote in his notebook, "Trade is bad." And I don't like, what do you make of that? Like, this is crazy.
Oh, my word.
Trade is bad. Like, that's a word for trade is bad.
Like, literally the opposite of the foundation of economic prosperity.
Yeah. And so like, this is what really worries me is like, it strikes me as plausible that Trump, like, so it could just, and take this with a grain of salt, is that he does sort of have a zero-sum view of the world. Mm-hmm. And so if one person is better off, this means another person is worse off. And so the trade is not like this to me. Like, this is catastrophic if this is what he actually thinks. But I think he might actually think this. It's like trade is not win-win. And if that's the case, then I'm not optimistic we're headed down the road to complete free trade.
Yeah. How do you? I mean, have you heard sophisticated arguments for why this is a good take?
So, I mean, there's stuff about like bringing back manufacturing jobs to the U.S. I mean, I think the one semi-plausible argument you could make for sort of these kinds of tariffs in principle, but not the ones he's actually imposing and the way he's actually imposing them, but just sort of the principle that he's like, look, like, you know, there's sort of like maybe geopolitical reasons why you would want to make certain things in the US. So like not necessarily for economic reasons, but like maybe you want to make, you know, have some semiconductor production in the United States because you're worried that 20 years down the line, you might not be able to cooperate with the country who's making them right now.
National security interests for like drone production.
Right. That strikes me. Yeah, that's not a terrible argument.
It's worth entertaining.
What's that?
It's worth entertaining if you're going to have a debate about it.
Yeah.
But just a flat, just tariffs. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I agree. Like, I think that would be the conversation to have, is to say, right, like, do we want to make drones in the United States for national security reasons? I think, yeah, that's absolutely a discussion I think that's worth having. Talk about the pros and cons of that. But like the other thing too, I mean, with these tariffs is it's not just like the tariffs, but like the policy uncertainty, which is, and so like even people who are fans of tariffs because they want to bring back manufacturing to the US, they're like, look, you're not going to build a factory in the US. You're not going to start tomorrow if you think Trump's going to radically change his trade policy in 3 days. And so like this is a huge, like just to add insult to injury is not just the tariffs, but like when are what are they on? Yeah. How long are they going to last? Who are they on? It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and even if you're thinking even the medium term, if it becomes a year, 2 years from now, and it looks very unlikely that the Democrats can beat JD Vance at the presidency or whatever, then you're really not going to be optimistic about that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think I don't know. I think this is a fool's errand for me to try to speculate on this. I kind of think Trump might try to run for a third term.
I don't even want to talk about that. That's like, I don't even understand. I mean, there's the one loophole thing, but like, yeah.
It would not shock me. And it does worry me. But I think the Democrats will be in a better position next time. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, the backlash to Trump has been pretty severe and pretty swift.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about one more of his terrible things, which is immigration, deportations, and things like that. Have you been noticing that there are some libertarians who are kind of like, yeah, this is all right. Like they are okay with the deportations out of, various reasons. One of them, I think they call it private borders, as opposed to like, they would favor private borders. And so, if people don't want you here, then you should leave. That's probably underselling what they would say. I don't mean to. So
I've gotten into some arguments with those sorts of libertarians. I even hesitate to apply the term because there are a lot of people who were libertarians, and I guess they still think of themselves as libertarians, but
some of them are in the Libertarian Party, so I guess you could use that as a way of still calling them libertarian. And for the most part, they agree with us on everything else. This seems to be this weird exception in my mind, and I don't know what explains it. So, what is your experience now?
It's interesting and depressing. With the immigration stuff, I've had these arguments. So I think there's sort of two arguments that what you might call like anti-immigration libertarians tend to make. One is the sort of old, you can't have open borders in a welfare state, and so they say, look, in a libertarian utopia, there's, very little redistribution. And so then you can't, and so then you can have open borders to your heart's content. But given that we have, all these entitlements and all this redistribution, the state can keep out immigrants to spare citizens the tax burden. There's a couple of thoughts on that. So one is like Milton Friedman is famous for having this line about you can't have open borders in a welfare state. But what he actually said And like very few people know his follow-up remark. It was like, and that's why we should have more illegal immigration. So he was pro-immigration, but he was just like, well, just do it illegally, which I think is kind of funny. I mean, and there are like empirical questions too. Like, is it actually the case that like, and I think the answer is no. Like you see some estimates of the fiscal impact of immigration, like maybe it's a little costly, but it's not super significant in either direction. But the other argument that I make here is, look, like you do have the welfare state in place, and libertarians don't think that serves as a justification for restricting other sorts of freedoms. So I was like, look, you want you want to ride a bicycle, or not a bicycle? Well, I guess bicycle you could, like a motorcycle without a helmet. Well, if you get into an accident, maybe you could go to a hospital that has some taxpayer funding, and this could increase the burden the taxpayers face. Is this so? Are you as a libertarian somebody who wants to mandate motorcycle helmets? Do you want to have the drug war because people on drugs, all this stuff. And so I think it is just this inconsistency. Like if they followed through their arguments to their conclusion, they would not be libertarian about anything. And so this is also sort of speaks to the second kind of argument that is becoming more and more popular. I think it's also a bad argument, which is, well, in some sense, citizens own public property. So like you won't we're all co-owners of like the street or like public schools because we pay taxes for them. So I mean, there's issues with that way of conceptual, but suppose we just
sure, yeah.
And like, okay, so if like a majority of taxpayers don't want immigrants using public roads, then they don't have to allow immigrants to use public roads. I was like, well, suppose a majority of taxpayers don't want drugs being transported on public roads. Or like libertarian books. Does that mean you can't transport libertarian books on public roads? And so, like, I do think these arguments are very bad. To be somewhat uncharitable, I think the reason they're popular, despite being very bad, is because they produce the conclusion that the people want, which is they want a justification for restricting immigration.
The best angle on it that I've heard is that, well, we're not going to abolish the welfare state overnight. We're not going to have the world that we want so that we can have the open borders that we want. So given the situation that we have, what laws should there be? And that would be it's seemingly a compromised position. It's like, well, while we have taxes, what should we spend it on? Let's not spend it on military, right? Like let's just be good about that. It's not unlibertarian to say let's defund the military first, right? Because you didn't say let's defund everything, right? Like you could say let's just defund this one thing. And so to me, it's let's deal with the world we live in because we don't have libertopia, and the world we live in needs to not have open borders.
Yeah, and so I think that's a very fair perspective, and frankly, like I think libertarians would be well served to think more about what do we do in the here and now rather than the world in which Robert Nozick is running against Milton Friedman for president.
Yeah.
So what do we do here? And I would say so. A lot of libertarians, and I think like Brian Kaplan is probably most famously associated with this idea of quote unquote keyhole solutions, where it's just like the most narrowly targeted solution that you can come up with is usually the best one. And so if we're really worried about the fiscal burden of immigration, then, some variation of you can come to the United States, live here and work here, but there are pretty significant restrictions on what sorts of taxpayer-funded benefits you can consume. And so then this alleviates the concern about the fiscal burden while also preserving somebody's right to move. And like, I'm not in love with that solution for a variety of reasons, but if like we're coming to the negotiating table and it's like outright exclusion, or this kind of keyhole solution where like, you can even put a time on it too. Where it's like the first, 10 years of your residence in the United States, you can't consume any of these benefits. Or like another thing I think Kaplan's proposes, which is like, you could pay a special tax. Like here again, I'm like I don't really, like that doesn't strike me as fair to charge someone a tax to come here when like I don't have to have a special extra tax that they would. But here again, if we say, all right, we're living in an imperfect world with imperfect, so this is like the Thomas Sowell line. There are no solutions, like trade-offs. So if you say like, this is a case where, at least one side says there's no solution to this, at least not until we abolish the welfare state. What do we do now? What's the trade-off? And I'd say, well, okay, if we have to do something like a restriction of benefits or the special tax, that's better than outright exclusion.
Yeah. Kaplan's line is there's a cheaper and more humane way of dealing with this than just saying no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right. I want to ask you a last closing question. I wanted to talk about this a little bit more, but I don't know if there more needs to be said. When Trump announced that he would have this new department called the Department of Government Efficiency, after you chuckle and realize what he's doing there, and that Elon Musk was going to be part of it, what was your initial reaction? And then, tell me how it's going in your mind so far.
I mean, I guess my initial reaction was that, this kind of goes back to like the Trump libertarian thing, where like a lot of libertarians or people who think of themselves as libertarians are like really optimistic about Trump, and I think it's like why we don't have evidence that should make you optimistic about this. And so I was like, this is not actually going to enhance government efficiency, and so I think that there are a couple of big concerns here. So, I mean, one is just it's like not clear that there's a whole lot of rhyme or reason to it. So like, I would like to reduce the size of government, but I also think it makes a lot more sense to do it somewhat slowly and gradually. So there's like a Hayekian angle here where you say like, maybe here are sort of the sectors that we're going to target over the next 3 years. And here's what you can expect, and here's how we're going to do it, blah, blah. Then just like, from what I can tell, like people are waking up in the morning and they're like getting like notices in their email that they've been fired. I think that's the wrong way to do it. But I also think that like another really big issue is if like we're really worried about government spending, it's like you got to go after stuff like entitlements. Like that's like where Social Security is going to need some like pretty serious reform. But like I see like some rhetoric, like I guess Musk is talking about like Social Security fraud is something he's been discussing, but like I couldn't say how pervasive that actually is. But like the issue with Social Security is not the fraud, it's the thing itself, if you're worried about government spending. Yeah. And so like a Department of Government Efficiency that was like, we're gonna phase out Social Security and privatize it over the next 10 years. It's like, all right, that's pretty good. I'm in favor of that. But it just doesn't seem like that's the plan.
Yeah. No, it does seem like there's a lot of sort of let's get some good wins, at least for the TV shows or for the news channels. Get some good wins in, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So like there's something interesting. Because I was sort of thinking the same thing where it's like you have these like stories and cases where you're like, oh, you were spending this money on this thing. Like this seems really silly.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, it's actually not as silly as it seems. But even when it is silly, it's like, okay, but like, this is like what we're talking like $100,000 or even $1 million. That's
couch cushion money. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, like you said, it looks good. Like when Elon Musk is posting about it on Twitter, it's like, oh, look at this stupid thing. What's it going to?
Yeah.
But like we've got $1 trillion elephants in the room is the issue.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's kind of where I am on it. I mean, I was optimistic at first, and my biggest concern is that Elon will just get bored and move on, and then it will fall apart because his energy typically drives a lot of things, and so we'll see. Let's hope it succeeds at what they say. We'll see what happens next 4th of July, I suppose. So, Chris, where can people find you online? I think you have a Substack. You're on X. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so on X you can my CA Freiman, and then my Substack is just Freiman or Freiman.substack.com. So FREIMA. Everybody always so you got it right, which is like impressive. But people like to invert the E and the I. So it's EI, not IE. So if you're watching this on YouTube, it is correct here.
Nice. Okay. Chris, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation, and wow, I actually realized we went longer than I normally do. So this is great. We have a lot of content here, and I've been really appreciative of this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I had a blast.